Welcome, everyone. My name is Patrick Masson, and I am the Executive Director of the Apereo Foundation. I'd like to thank the Xerti Project Management Committee and the conference organizers for their gracious invitation to speak with you today. My presentation will focus on a critical topic impacting open source communities today, as concerns with sustainability, maintainership, and authenticity continue to rise across open source software projects and communities. Essentially, ensuring the our in source. Specifically, I will address the growing challenges posed by single vendor and single source models in open source software development. While these approaches can appear enticing, they often create trapdoors rather than open doors for both adopters and contributors. We'll explore what single vendor open source and single source mean and how they operate, the key risks they introduce, both to the sustainability of projects and the broader open source ecosystem. Real-world examples will be given to highlight the consequences of these models and actions. And I'll provide some practical recommendations to help you, as contributors and adopters, ensure openness and collaborative ownership remain at the heart of open source. If I may, please let me take a moment to share a bit about my professional and community background to provide some context for the perspective on open source and education and beyond I'm about to provide. Professionally, I've been fortunate to hold a range of leadership roles that have shaped my approach to technology, collaboration, and innovation. I served as director of the UCLA Media Lab, where I worked on the intersection of media and technology. I also held the position of Chief Information Officer at the State University of New York at Delhi, managing IT strategies to support academic goals. Later, I became General Manager of the Open Source Initiative, where I was deeply involved in promoting and advocating for open source principles globally. Currently, I serve as the Executive Director of the Apereo Foundation, continuing my commitment to advancing open source solutions in education. Additionally, I've shared my experiences and insights as an adjunct professor at the State University of New York at Albany. I was also fortunate to serve on my local school board. On the community side, I've always believed in the power of collaboration and shared effort. I've served as a board member for JSIG, contributed to the Moodle project, and founded EDUCAUSE's Openness Community Group to create spaces for dialogue and innovation. I've also been a featured speaker and organizer for prominent open source conferences like OSCON, LibrePlanet, FOSSE, and All Things Open. Together, these roles have allowed me to engage with diverse stakeholders, from educators to developers, and to advocate for the transformative potential of open source in education and beyond. The Apereo Foundation was officially founded in 2012, but its roots extend much further, dating back to 1999. Over the years, we've built a strong legacy of supporting innovative and collaborative educational technology. At our core, our mission is clear: to assist academia in developing, adopting, and maintaining open source software that enhances teaching, learning, and research. We believe in the power of community-driven solutions to address the unique needs of educators and learners. The Foundation also serves as a fiscal sponsor and provides critical services to support projects under our umbrella. But what is truly sets us apart is our commitment to building community-led projects, both at the board level and within each of our individual software projects. This ensures that the solutions we create are deeply aligned with the needs of the educational community. In everything we do, we stay true to our guiding principle: for education, by education. This reflects our belief that the best tools and technologies for education are born from the experience, passion, and collaboration of educators themselves. The Apereo Foundation serves as both a fiscal sponsor and steward for a diverse portfolio of open source projects. These projects originated from higher education institutions and industry leaders, each addressing critical needs in teaching, learning, research, and administration. Many of these tools have roots in universities, exemplifying collaboration and innovation in academia. For instance, beadwork began at the University of Washington in 2002 as a robust calendaring solution. CAS, the Central Authentication Service, was developed at Yale University in 2005 to address secure single sign-on. HAX, a flexible web editor for educational content, emerged from Penn State University in 2015. Sakai, a widely used learning management system, was initiated by the University of Michigan in 2004. And I'm sure I don't need to tell this community about Xerte, which began at the University of Nottingham in 2008. Each project has evolved over the years to help form Apereo, ensuring long-term sustainability, community support, and alignment with the values of open source. Today, Apereo is proud to continue fostering the spirit of innovation and collaboration, helping these projects thrive for the benefit of education worldwide. Let's take a moment to celebrate the incredible global community that powers the Apereo Foundation and its mission to support higher education through open source software. Apereo embodies the phrase, for education, by education. This collaborative spirit is evident in the sheer scale of our network and its impact. Apereo supports tens of open source software projects, empowering educators, students, and administrators. Our community includes hundreds of institutional and individual members and thousands of adopting academic and research organizations. These projects collectively impact millions, from students and faculty to staff and researchers worldwide. Our contributors and adopters span continents, showcasing the global reach and diversity of Apereo's network, from prestigious universities like Harvard, Princeton, and ETH Zurich, to specialized institutions like the Albany Medical College and Art Institute of Chicago, to collaborative councils and organizations like ISU Portail in France and Axis in Japan. The list is vast and growing. The Apereo Foundation thrives because of this deep commitment to collaboration and shared purpose. Ultimately, this slide is about more than just numbers or names. It's about illustrating Apereo's success as a community-driven foundation that enables innovation and addresses the evolving needs of higher education. Together, this network ensures that students, educators, and institutions worldwide have the tools and support they need to succeed. And this is just a glimpse of our collective achievement. What truly sets the Apereo Foundation apart is its leadership. The Apereo Foundation is unique because it is governed by individuals who are deeply embedded in the world of higher education. Leaders who understand the challenges, opportunities, and nuances of working with colleges and universities because they are part of these institutions themselves. This is not a foundation run from the outside, but by people who are in the trenches every day, professors, administrators, technologists, and innovators who know firsthand what it takes to drive meaningful change in education. Here on this slide, you'll see the names of current and past members of the Apereo board and its alumni. These are the fiduciaries responsible for guiding our mission. Their diverse representation, from leading universities like New York University, Stanford, and Yale, to global organizations like Creative Commons and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, reflects Apereo's global reach and its commitment to fostering open source solutions for education across continents. By working together, this leadership team ensures that Apereo not only stays true to its mission of serving higher education, but also remains agile and innovative in addressing the evolving needs of institutions around the world. This is what makes Apereo a leader in open source solutions for education, and more importantly, a partner that truly understands the priorities of the academic community. While I'm sure this audience already can list several benefits of open source, I'd like to touch on a few. Open source development offers numerous advantages for both developers and end users. For developers, it fosters a shared vision and direction, enabling co-creation and collaboration on innovative technologies. This peer community provides valuable support, while developers can enhance their skills through hands-on experience. Open source also promotes integration and interoperability across platforms, giving developers more freedom to innovate. For end users, open source provides unmatched flexibility and customization driven by the needs and input of the community. With continuous innovation and rapid development, users benefit from cutting-edge solutions. It also ensures long-term independence from proprietary vendors, reducing vendor lock-in and lowering total cost of ownership. The open source development process also offers numerous advantages for software projects. First, it fosters increased contribution and collaboration from a global community, which accelerates development and drives innovation. Open source projects also tend to maintain high quality standards because they are continuously tested and refined by a diverse group of contributors. Additionally, they build enhanced credibility and trust, as anyone can review the code and verify its integrity. By leveraging open source solutions, projects can significantly reduce development costs. Lastly, strong support networks that emerge around these projects ensure that help is always available when needed, making open source a powerful model for sustainable growth. As I'm sure many here can attest, open source software has played a transformative role in higher education, experiencing significant milestones over the past decade. It began making waves in 2011 with when Pearson's OpenClass and Instructure Canvas was unveiled at EDUCAUSE. Just a year later, 2012, was famously dubbed the Year of the MOOC by the New York Times, while the Chronicle of Higher Education spotlighted the adoption of GitHub by academics. In 2013, the merger of the JSIG and Sakai Foundations consolidated efforts to drive open source forward. By 2014, the Chronicle declared that open source had reached a tipping point in higher education. And by 2017, EDUCAUSE emphasized the need for every campus to embrace open source, showcasing its growing ubiquity and impact. These milestones highlight how open source has become an integral part of innovation and collaboration in education. Open source software has also become a driving force in the transformation of higher education and education technology, especially within many of the organizations higher ed relies on most. Major milestones demonstrate its growing importance. Back in 2014, Microsoft famously embraced Linux, making a pivotal shift in the tech landscape. By 2016, Wired magazine declared Open Source won, and the U.S. White House underscored its value with a memo on reusable and open source software. Fast forward to 2018, when IBM acquired Red Hat and Microsoft acquired GitHub, further cementing open source's role at the heart of tech. More recently, in 2020, the European Union launched its open source strategy, while leading grant organizations began prioritizing open source in funding decisions. Together, these developments highlight open source as a cornerstone of collaboration and progress in education and beyond. Open source software has transformed the way higher education institutions approach technology, empowering collaboration, transparency, and shared progress. But with this success comes a cautionary tale. As interest in open source grows, so too do efforts to exploit its popularity with what we might call open source traps. These traps often mimic the language and appeal of true open source, but ultimately limit the freedoms that make open source so valuable. One of the most concerning is the rise of what's being called the post-open source mindset among some developers. This perspective reflects a shift away from the values that have traditionally underpinned open source: transparency, collaboration, and shared benefit. Instead, it leans towards disinterest in, even distrust with, open source licensing, prioritizing closed ecosystems, or even choosing proprietary paths altogether. This not only weakens the foundational principles of open source, but also risks eroding trust and collaboration within the developer community. Organizations engaging with these practices may inadvertently undermine the shared ecosystems they've benefited from, setting dangerous precedents for the future. We need to recognize these trends and actively engage in protecting what makes open source a force for progress and collective empowerment. Another troubling trend threatening the integrity of open source software is the practice of open washing. This term describes organizations or projects that market themselves as open source while failing to uphold the fundamental principles that define it. Open washing often involves releasing partial or superficial portions of a project under an open source license while keeping key components proprietary or inaccessible. At its core, this tactic is misleading. It allows entities to reap the benefits of reputation and community by being labeled open source without embracing its true values of transparency, inclusivity, and collaboration. This is not only confusing to users and developers, but also dilutes the meaning of open source itself. If left unchecked, open washing could further undermine trust in the movement and discourage genuine contributions from individuals and organizations alike. Another challenge reshaping the open source landscape is the growing prevalence of open core business models. At first glance, open core software appears to align with open source principles, offering a free and publicly accessible version of the software. However, the reality is more complicated. In this model, the core functionality is open, but essential features, tools, or support are locked behind a proprietary paywall. While this approach can provide a substantial revenue stream for companies, it often creates a tiered ecosystem where the free version is intentionally limited and the full capabilities are reserved for paying customers. This can stifle community collaboration and create dependencies on proprietary elements, leaving users and organizations with less freedom than true open source promises. As open core gains traction, it's important to critically evaluate its impact and consider whether it supports or erodes the values that make open source a powerful force in collective progress. Perhaps the most deceptive challenge facing the open source community today is the rise of what's been dubbed "fopen source." Unlike traditional open source, which embraces collaboration and accessibility, open source projects are designed to appear open while being anything but. These projects often use restrictive licenses or convoluted governance structures that severely limit how the software can be used, modified, or redistributed. While they may technically meet the minimum requirements of an open source license, their practices run counter to the spirit of the movement, creating barriers instead of opportunities. Open source undermines trust, confuses users, and risks tarnishing the reputation of open source as a whole. For the community and the organizations that depend on open source, it's vital to call out these practices and reaffirm our commitment to the values that have driven the movement forward for decades: openness, transparency, and true collaboration. In the world of open source, organizational and operational models shape how projects are managed and thrive. Today, I'll explore three distinct approaches: foundation-based models, single vendor models, and single source software models. Each has unique characteristics, motivations, and impacts on the open source ecosystem, and ultimately the success of both the project and the communities that adopt the software. Let's start with the foundation-based model. This approach focuses on openly licensed projects managed by nonprofit foundations, like the Apache Software Foundation or the Apereo Foundation. These foundations are mission-driven, prioritizing community engagement and aligning with open source principles. They employ shared governance through fiduciary boards, defined processes, and transparent operations, ensuring accountability. By supporting a broad constituency, they deliver responsive resources while maintaining a long-term strategy for sustainability. The core motivations here are advancing shared goals, adhering to foundational principles, and driving meaningful impact within the community. Next, we have the single vendor model, where a company steers the direction of an openly licensed project, as seen with tools like H5P. This model is market-focused, often prioritizing the company's commercial goals over broader community needs. Governance and decision-making remain centralized, leaving little room for external participation. These companies carefully manage messaging and often prioritize profitability, delivering value to their investors or stakeholders. Motivations typically revolve around creating revenue, differentiation in the market, and securing customer lock-in through tailored offerings. Finally, the single source model is where an openly licensed project is run by an individual or small organization, such as the case with Network Time Protocol. This approach is highly software focused, with decisions driven by the founder's vision. Communications and governance are typically informal and limited to immediate needs. These projects are often solution oriented, created to address specific challenges or support larger initiatives. Motivations stem from personal interests to, a clear sense of direction and a hands-on approach to code contributions, making this model deeply connected to the creator's goals. Now let's look at some of the risks associated with each model. When adopting a single vendor open source solution, several risks can emerge. First, there's the potential for vendor lock-in, where you become heavily dependent on one provider, making it difficult to switch not just vendors, but the software itself. Remember, one of the core benefits of open source is the ecosystem it creates, including support options, allowing dissatisfied customers to find other providers for the software they rely on. Additionally, if the project stagnates or is abandoned, users are left without support or updates. The vendor also controls the roadmap, which may not align with your needs. Limited community involvement can reduce collaborative problem solving and creativity. There's also the risk of licensing changes that could affect your usage rights. Finally, a buyout of the vendor can lead to uncertain futures for your open source project. Contributing to a single vendor open source project can limit your influence as decisions often rest with the vendor, leaving contributors with less say. Your contributions may also be rejected without clear reasons, and there may be no defined path for moving into leadership roles. Intellectual property boundaries can be vague, creating uncertainty about ownership. Additionally, contributors face the risk of exploitation as the vendor may control the direction, potentially diminishing the community's involvement. This dynamic can lead to fractured relationships and reduced collaboration, harming both personal and project reputations. When adopting a single source open source project, there are several risks to consider. Limited participation can lead to bottlenecked development, slowing progress as fewer contributors are involved. This often ties the project's future to the vision of just one group or individual, leaving users dependent on a narrow perspective. Community fragmentation can also occur as different factions diverge, and with this comes the threat of burnout among core contributors. Lastly, there's a risk of abandonment. Projects may not have the longevity needed, leaving adopters with unsupported software. These risks should be carefully evaluated when choosing open source solutions. When contributing to single source open source projects, several risks could be considered. First, contributors may have limited influence, as direction making is often centralized with few maintainers. This can lead to the risk of abandonment, especially if the primary maintainer loses interest or resources. Additionally, governance may lack transparency, leaving contributors uncertain about how decisions are made. There's also the danger of becoming overly dependent on one maintainer, which can be problematic if they step away. Finally, contributors face reputation risks if the project faces issues, controversies reflecting back on their involvement. Adopting open source projects from foundation-based communities comes with certain risks as well. One key challenge is the ambiguity in project status. Those leading the project often differ from those leading the foundation. This is a positive as projects remain autonomous and self-directed without foundation interference, but users may find governance confusing, and even if the foundation is doing well, a sponsored project can still fail. Development and support can also be fragmented, as contributions to and resources for various projects in a foundation often come from a variety of sources, which can complicate communications, assessment, issue management, and sustainability. Many of these projects rely on volunteers, which can lead to delays or a lack of consistency in quality. Additionally, non-technical forks, divergence in project direction by users focused on non-software issues, can introduce further unpredictability. Lastly, these projects often operate under non-traditional business models, which may create financial sustainability concerns. Contributors to foundation-based open source projects may face specific challenges unique to self-organizing communities of practice. The reliance on volunteers can create peaks and valleys in project development, making it harder to sustain momentum or ensure continuity. Governance can become complex, leading to unclear decision-making processes. Recognizing contributions and fostering career growth may be difficult, as pathways to advancement within the project and even foundation may be unclear. Contributors may also encounter conflicts regarding intellectual property, for example, issues with contributor license agreements. Some may struggle to differentiate between the project itself and the overarching foundation, which supports the community. Budgets are often limited, which can make it harder to support the community beyond volunteer labor, for example, paying for a venue for events, paying for infrastructure, securing dedicated consulting around legal issues, and so forth. Next, I'd like to provide some specific examples of each model we've discussed within higher education open source. Let's take a moment to look at two examples of open core models, Instructure Canvas and Yola's Sailfish OS. Both rely on open source communities for foundational software, yet they reserve key features or enhancements behind proprietary licensed software. This creates a tension. While they benefit from the trust, collaboration, and flexibility associated with open source, they also introduce risks to users and developers. These include restricted freedoms, a fragmented user experience, and potential vendor lock-in. Essentially, the openness becomes a facade designed to attract contributors while limiting access to the full potential of the software unless you're willing to pay. It's a model that reaps the rewards of open source without fully committing to its principles, which can undermine the broader community's trust and engagement. Let's take a moment to examine the risks that arise when open source projects like H5P and Moodle are owned and managed by a single company. Unlike community-governed projects where decisions are made collaboratively, these models concentrate all the authority and control within one organization. This creates a potential for conflicts of interest, limits diverse input, and can make the project's future dependent on the company's priorities or business goals. This centralized control can also blur the lines for open source advocates, who may assume such projects are fully community-driven, when in reality, the benefits of collective oversight, such as transparency, accountability, shared responsibility, even ownership, are significantly reduced. These differences are critical to understanding how open source governance impacts trust and collaboration. And as we've seen, the companies that own the projects can sell them off. Of course, foundations are not exempt from risk. When foundations transition from a nonprofit structure to a commercial organization or sell off resources, the effects ripple through the project contributors and the adopters. For contributors, these changes can undermine trust as decisions shift from community-driven priorities to revenue-focused goals. edX, for example, started as a nonprofit to advance open education, but pivoted to a commercial model when acquired by 2U, leaving many in the community questioning the future of its open access principles. Similarly, Koali's move to a for-profit structure reshaped its governance, sidelining the collaborative ethos that attracted universities to the project. For adopters, the risks include increased costs, reduced transparency, and potential vendor lock-in, creating uncertainty among long-term stability and alignment with their values. This highlights the vulnerabilities in foundations with limited community participation. Along with this brief introduction of various open source development models and the risks associated with each, I'd also like to provide some recommendations for you when evaluating both open source software projects and the organizations that support them. For end users or adopting organizations, when evaluating an open source software project, it's critical to start with governance and motivations. Understand the organizational model behind the project. Who manages? Who manages it? Is it led by a foundation, a company, or a collective? The motivations of its contributors and sponsors can signal stability, alignment with your goals, and long-term viability. Next, look at participation opportunities. A healthy project will invite contributions at all levels: coding, documentation, governance, and decision making. Pay attention to how responsibilities are distributed and whether the community has a say in guiding the project's future. This transparency and inclusivity can shape how the project evolves. Then examine the project's practices and principles. Consider how well they align with your organization's culture and operations. For example, does the community prioritize openness, reliability, and rapid innovation? Alignment ensures a smoother integration into your workflows. Finally, ask the tough what if questions. What happens if a key contributor, organization, or sponsor departs? Could your use of the software be impacted? These questions are vital to understanding potential risks, like vendor lock-in or over-reliance on a single stakeholder, which can compromise your flexibility and sustainability. By thoroughly assessing these factors, you position your organization to make informed strategic choices in adopting open source solutions. For contributors, when considering participation in an open source project, the first step is to clearly acknowledge your motivations. Why are you joining? What are you looking to fix, improve, or adopt with the tools that you're working on? Once you've identified your motivations, it's important to measure them against those of the project's maintainers, contributors, and founders. Are your goals aligned? Understanding this dynamic helps you manage expectations and avoid potential conflicts down the road. Next, take a deep dive into the project's onboarding and governance processes. What are the paths to getting involved? Review the documentation to understand how contributions are welcomed and processed. Assess whether there are clear opportunities for you to engage or limitations you should be aware of. This also means connecting with your peers in the project. How do they contribute and communicate, and how might you contribute alongside them? These interactions help you understand the project's culture and the collective direction. Again, ask yourself the critical question: what happens if I or someone else, the founder, maintainer, key contributor, a person or organization, or even the project itself, think fork, leaves the project? Open source relies heavily on sustainability and continuity, so considering the long-term stability of a project is essential. And that by project, that includes the people and organizations involved as well. How well is this project set up to survive when key contributors move on? This is a key factor in ensuring that your contributions and time invested will matter beyond your immediate involvement. To recap, single vendor and single source projects present significant risks for both users and contributors interested in the value and benefits derived from authentic open source. Foundations too have risks. Awareness and proactive measures can help mitigate these risks. I'd also like to invite a call to action. Promote authentic open source values, community collaboration and co-creation, transparency in communications, and inclusivity in decision making. All of you are engaged in open source as users, contributors, developers. These core principles are key to healthy, authentic open source software development and communities, and I hope you will foster those activities within the communities you work. Finally, authentic open source thrives when we share control and ownership. Let's work together to keep the ecosystem open, fair, and secure for all, or the hour in open source. I'd like to thank you for joining me today and would be happy to answer any questions or hear your comments. Please feel free to email me at patrick.masson@apereo.org. And thank you once again to the Xerte community, the conference organizer, and the project management team for allowing me to share my presentation with you today.